Yikes. Donald Trump struggled to talk himself out of a rather simple question about his policy on childcare while at the New York Economic Club. Let's watch that.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time.
Jessica Tarlov challenged her co-hosts on Fox's The Five to make sense of what he said. Let's watch.
I would dare any of you to listen to his answer on childcare and tell me what the hell he was talking about. It was one of the more incoherent things I've ever heard. He thinks tariffs are going to pay for everything. We know that they're a tax on the consumer. But this really highlights a big problem that everyone is saying, well, Trump is so transparent and Trump's out there and that's all that matters. What matters is the content of what he's saying. And none of it is explainable. This issue, which is a big priority for people, obviously a central plank of what's going on in the Harris campaign, he doesn't have an answer besides tariffs. And J.D. Vance yesterday was talking about just have grandma and grandpa do more, that's some sort of solution for people. He's going to have energy prices, drill baby drill, even though we're producing more oil than we ever have before, leading the world, more tax cuts for the rich, and tariffs are the only way that we're going to be paying for it.
I think what's fascinating is he didn't give an answer in his response to the question. But why didn't he just say nothing? He felt like he had to give some answer, like, yes, we are going to do something. I will prioritize some kind of legislation to make childcare more affordable. It sounds like the solution being grandpa and grandpa take control, tariffs, which is, goods, not services, where we can't import some kind of, I don't know, childcare robot. Is that how that's going to reduce costs? There's really no explanation there, but it's interesting. He didn't feel comfortable just saying, we're not going to do anything on it.
He's talking about the fact that tariffs would increase American wages, presumably through the reshoring of manufacturing, and also reduce the federal deficit, which leads to higher GDP growth. And having an overall healthier economy can give more families options when it comes to childcare, whether they have higher take-home pay because they're paying less in taxes or they're earning higher wages, means that they can better afford childcare. Or even better, for a lot of families who want one of the parents to stay home with their kids, if they have a higher earning breadwinner in their family, then you don't have to have a two-income household anymore. And you can have mom or dad stay home with the kids and not give 75% of their paycheck to childcare. And I know that's what he was talking about because J.D. Vance dropped a 350-word policy proposal on X just yesterday in response to a user, where he talked about the fact that just paying for people's childcare doesn't really solve the fundamental problem, which is that too many people are caught in this two-income trap where they're not able to stay home and take care of their kids, when most women surveyed who have kids say that they wish they could stay home, but they just can't financially afford to do it. And grandma and grandma are being referenced as people who could potentially help take care of kids because even if you cover childcare, what you end up creating is a scarcity problem. Unless you have more supply of childcare providers, simply just having the government pay for it means that the prices are actually going to increase even more because you're going to have a higher demand. He talks about this as well. If you subsidize something but don't increase the supply of it, you're going to raise prices without getting an increase in quality. So I would recommend everybody go read this tweet from J.D. Vance. Again, he posted it yesterday at 10:30 a.m. It's a nice 350-word little policy proposal and really talks about the fundamental issues facing American families that have created this childcare crisis.
Yeah, I think that with the tariff thing, if I'm someone who's working minimum wage in the United States, let's say I have a manufacturing job, I am not optimistic that charging a higher tariffs on foreign goods coming in is going to bring manufacturing home because you just raise prices. If tariffs are 10%, raise your price to be 10% higher, have the consumer pay it. That's what we've seen the effects of tariffs be over the years, and they'll keep saving the costs of keeping manufacturing offshore. So unless Trump has some kind of plan to incentivize the manufacturing to come back, or force these companies to come back, or set price controls so that that cost is not pushed onto the consumer, I don't really see that working. But I do think for anyone who finds his perspective on the economy, whatever it may be, that is it concerning that you gave a better description as to the cause and effect there in the policy plan than the candidate did before the Economic Club of New York? Like, are you worried about that, Amber, his inability to describe it as you did? You did a better job than he or JD Vance did.
I suppose you could say the same thing about Kamala Harris, who described deadlines related to time in her first big sit down CNN interview and is sort of known for her word salads. I think it's pretty negligible. It's kind of a wash between these two about who is more coherent. But I will say that even when Trump has some of these word salad moments, they seem to have more substance baked within than when Kamala Harris is talking about yellow school buses. But all of that being said, economists do disagree with your analysis of tariffs and how they're simply a tax on the consumer. Jessica Tarlov said that in that Fox News clip as well. And most economists who have analyzed Trump's plan say that the cost to consumers would actually be between negligible to about $2,600 a year, which would surely be offset by the potential increase in wages. The reason that tariffs would help with bringing manufacturing home is that it makes it more expensive for businesses to do business in China, for example, for them to outsource all of their labor to cheap Chinese workers, because you're making up for that gain in your profit margin by having to pay that tariff when you import the goods back into the United States. According to this article from USA Today, where they interviewed economists, they said some economists even argue that Americans would come out ahead in the long term. Kent Smetters, who's a University of Pennsylvania Wharton School professor, says he's somewhere in the middle. Forecasts in the thousands make rigid assumptions that aren't necessarily true, some economists said. For example, the Peterson Institute for International Economics says that assuming the entire cost of the tariff is passed on to consumers or domestic producers is not exactly accurate. A study by the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center also assumes that consumers would pay the entire tariff amount, which most economists agree is an overestimation of the direct impact on consumers. So there's a lot of conflicting analysis of what exactly tariffs would cost to the consumer, but I think bar none, you could say that, of course, they would reduce the federal deficit and would have a generally positive impact on U.S. manufacturing. Trump does have a plan for reshoring manufacturing as well. I would check it out, agenda47.com.
Yeah, I think, Kamala Harris's plan is very clear. We would be hard pressed to find her asked to explain her economic plan and get a response like this. If we did, it would be played over and over again on Fox News. I mean, when she did her campaign trip to North Carolina and she spoke about increasing the child tax credit, that was pretty coherent. I know exactly what that plan is. If I'm being honest, the chain of cause and effect is depending on a lot of actors that want to maximize their profits to do the right thing by families to reduce their childcare costs, when we know that's not how corporations make decisions. They're absolutely going to do everything they can to keep their profits high. And so I do see the doubling the child tax credit as something that can reduce care costs directly to families. And I don't know why Donald Trump, if he's going to give a response to that question, that is as long as it was, why there's no direct link made there, why there is no economic plan there. This is the Economic Club of New York. And so to not be able to speak coherently in front of them is shocking. To not even be able to string a sentence together descriptive of a plan is shocking. And if that was Kamala Harris, it would be played over and over again. There's a reason Fox isn't playing her talking about her economic plan, because they don't want their viewers to see what the other side has to offer. And so this idea that Trump can get before them and not be able to say what the deficit will be or what the impact on the deficit will be, because of course it's dependent on Congress's budgeting. But he can't even say what his tax changes and tariff changes, what that effect will be on the deficit. But he can say that the 2 trillion under Biden was bad when he's added over 7 trillion. So his lack of understanding of the macro economy and ability to explain the cause and effect of his policies, I think, is a huge liability here. And I'm not sure how I feel about his mental capacity. And I say this as someone who is critical of Biden for this, who is, not a Democrat, who is not a Kamala Harris supporter. But how can he speak this way and people are not questioning his mental fortitude and ability to serve at the highest office? I worry about people getting in there and running the government in a way that's totally different from what the elected leader wanted, just because he seemingly can't describe his own plans. So who wrote them?
Fox News has been covering Kamala's economic plan, namely the price controls that would lead to scarcity in groceries for everyday Americans, and also the unrealized gains tax, which would absolutely cripple entrepreneurship and small businesses in this country. But that being said, they're not covering Kamala's word salads about her economic plan because she hasn't sat down for an unscripted conversation like the one that Trump did at the Economic Club. The speech that you're referencing in North Carolina was read off of a teleprompter. I could read just about anything I didn't know anything about off of a teleprompter and sound coherent too. But until she does the media, gets under the media scrutiny that Trump has, between Trump and JD Vance, they have collectively done almost 40 interviews in the past year, or the past 2 months rather, since Kamala Harris ascended to the top of the ticket. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have done a collective 4. Kamala herself has done 1, and it was an 18-minute softball interview from CNN. So until she starts doing press conferences, does these sit-down remarks and question and answer sessions at various clubs and places and organizations, then it's not a fair comparison to say, well, she sounded coherent when she was reading off a teleprompter and Trump was sitting down for an unscripted Q&A with the Economic Club. So I don't think those two things are comparable at all. And then I would also say on the child tax credit, Kamala Harris only came up with that plan after it was already proposed by Trump and Vance. They offered to increase the child tax credit to $5,000. And then Kamala responded by saying, well, okay, that's fine, guys, but guess what? I'm going to do $6,000. I mean, it's ridiculous that she thinks that she can just basically one-up the other party platform, and that's going to somehow convince voters that she really knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, I think, JD Vance has been called out about his hypocrisy over the child tax credit time and again. I mean, he would have showed up in the Senate to vote for the proposal to expand the child tax credit and help 16 million low-income kids get ahead if he actually cared about working families, but he didn't even show up to the vote. So this idea that he's
what was the
uniquely a guy
bill?
who cares about it was the child tax credit plan from Senator Ron Wyden. He didn't even show up to vote on the bill. And so the bill passed in the House in the February, but it failed to overcome the GOP filibuster in the Senate earlier in the month. JD Vance
What
could have
else
been
was
a
in
part
the
of
bill,
it during
though?
it passed in the Senate, but he wasn't. So at the end of the day, these are guys that care so much about working families when they're running for the highest office. But as someone who grew up in a working family that struggled to get by during the recession, I have a hard time believing anyone who's going to cut taxes for America's biggest corporations who are keeping prices high and wages low, but not cut taxes by the same margin for working people, cut them by a lower margin and have those expire in December of 2025, but have corporate tax cuts be permanent and by a greater margin. I just can't really believe those guys are for working families.
You should look at the bill that they were actually voting on because it included things besides the child tax credit that ended up being a poison pill for Republicans. And I would also point out to you that Kamala Harris in 2017 voted against a Trump-backed bill to double the child tax credit. So if there's any hypocrisy, it's coming from the Kamala Harris campaign. We're going to continue to talk about both candidates' economic plans here on Rising. We're going to take a quick break and be right back.